Hello everyone, I'm here with a video on poets and pancakes. This is for class 12. In this video, I have covered all the important questions. In fact, it covers the whole chapter. All questions that can be asked are here. I have tried to simplify it. I hope this video is helpful to you. So let us first see the summary. The story, Poets and Pancakes, is a passage from ASOKAMITRAN's book My Years with Boss. ASOKAMITRAN talks about his days at the Gemini Studio. The Gemini Studio produced many films which impacted the aspect of Indian life. Here, ASOKAMITRAN talks about a trendy makeup brand named Pancake. Here we can see an artist with a lot of makeup. Although on screen when we see, it looks all very natural and people look very beautiful. But otherwise the reality is that they put a lot of pancakes, lot of makeup material. In this lesson, ASOKAMITRAN talks about Gemini Studios and all that helps in keeping it in spotlight. He starts by making a mention about Pancakes, the famous makeup brand which Gemini Studios ordered in truckloads. He then talks about the plight of actors and actresses who have to bear too many lights on their face while getting ready in the makeup room. The makeup department, according to him, used heaps of makeup to turn them into ugly-looking creatures. Shockingly, he talks about the office boy of the makeup department whose task is to slap paint onto the faces of players at the time of crowd shooting. He was a poet and had joined the studio in the hope of becoming an actor, screenwriter, director, or a lyricist. In those days, the author used to work inside a cubicle and had a task of collecting newspaper cuttings, which according to others was insignificant. Thus, office boy would come in time again to bother him with his complaints. He was well convinced that the reason behind his misery was Subbu. He thought Subbu had an advantage because he was born a Brahmin. Subbu was a resourceful man whose loyalty made him stand out. He was tailor-made for films and it was difficult to imagine filmmaking without him. He was very welcoming and was known for his hospitality. Just like many others at Gemini Studio, he also did poetry. He worked for the story department, which also consisted of a lawyer. People generally called him the opposite of a legal practitioner. He was a logical and neutral man amidst a room full of dreamers. ASOKAMITRAN then describes how Gemini Studios got a chance to host a group of international performers called Moral Rearmament Army. Though the plots and messages were not complex, their sets and costumes were near to perfection, so much so that for many years Tamil plays displayed sunset and sunrise in a way inherited from Jotham Valley. Then another guest, Stephen Spender, comes to visit Gemini Studios. People had hardly heard of him and they couldn't even connect with him due to linguistic barriers. It was not until a few years later that ASOKAMITRAN saw his name in a book and realized who he actually was. So let us now start with few question and answers. I have tried to cover the whole chapter and I have simplified too so that it is easier to learn. Even if you give 2 hearings to this video, you will be able to write very good answers. So let's start. What is the significance of the words poet and pancake? Pancake was the brand name of makeup material that Gemini Studios bought in large quantities. It was used as a makeup base for the actors shooting in the studio. Thus, this chapter deals with the people working in Gemini Studios, most of them in the makeup department. The word poets comes from the fact that Gemini Studios was the favorite haunt of poets who had influenced the thinking of employees of the studios. It was also visited by English poet Stephen Spender. What is the writer's view of Robert Clive? The makeup department of the Gemini Studios was in a building that was believed to have been Robert Clive's stables. Various other buildings in Madras were said to have been his residence. The writer says that Clive's stay in India, and specifically Madras, was for a very short period, though he married in St. Mary's Church in Madras. But during this brief stay, he seemed to have done a lot of moving besides fighting some tough battles in far-flung areas of India. Next question. What does the writer say about national integration in the studio? The writer says that the makeup department did not have people belonging to the same geographical region. It was first headed by a Bengali, who was succeeded by a Maharashtrian, who was assisted by a Dharwar Kannadiga, an Andhra, a Madras Indian Christian, an Anglo-Burmese and usual locals Tamils. All this shows that people from all over the country work together. So in a light-hearted manner, he refers to this as national integration. Next question. Did the people at Gemini Studios have any particular political affiliations? The people at Gemini Studios did not have any particular political affiliations. The common political notions of the day managed to influence them, but that was limited to wearing khadi and admiring the Gandhian philosophy. They were averse to the term communism, but had only an erroneous understanding of the concept. Describe the makeup room at Gemini Studios. The makeup room of Gemini Studios looked more like hair cutting salons with incandescent, that is very bright and heated lights at all angles and half a dozen large mirrors. The lights made the room so hot that those subjected to makeup had to put up with its fiery misery. How was strict hierarchy maintained in the makeup room? Each makeup man was allotted his task according to his designation. The chief makeup man put makeup on the chief actors and actresses. His senior assistant attended to the second hero and heroine, the junior assistant the main comedian. The actors who played the crowd were the responsibility of the office boy. Why did the office boy go to the author? Why was the author praying for crowd shooting? The author worked in a cubicle, apparently with nothing to do. The office boy frequently barged in to enlighten him on how Gemini Studios was allowing his great literary talent to go waste in the department fit for barbers and perverts. The author's only hope to reprieve was to pray that makeup for crowd shooting would call him away. Who was Subbu's enemy and why? Subbu's success and his undisputed position as number 2 of Gemini Studios made the office boy his enemy. He firmly believed that Subbu was responsible for all his woes, humiliating neglect and ignominy. Describe the makeup department of the Gemini Studios. How did it prepare the players for the movie? The makeup department of the Gemini Studio was located in the upstairs of Robert Clive's stables. They bought lavishly used truckloads of a makeup material called Pancake. The makeup room contained large mirrors and bright lights set up at various angles. It looked like a hair-cutting salon. It was a terrible experience for an actor or actress to undergo the makeup. The lights generated intense heat. The members of the makeup department represented different parts of India. It symbolized national integration. 95% of shooting of a film during those days was done on the sets. It demanded that every pore of the actor's face should be closed. Thus, they were painted and looked ugly. A strict hierarchy was maintained. The chief makeup man made the hero and heroines ugly. The office boy painted the crowd players ugly. What advantage did the office boy think Subbu had? The office boy believed that Subbu's advantage was by virtue of being born a Brahmin. This would have given him greater exposure to a more affluent society, great opportunities, and better openings. Next question. What were Subbu's literary achievements? Subbu was an accomplished poet who addressed his poetry to the masses in spite of being talented enough to write higher forms of poetry. His works included several story poems and a full-length novel, Thilana Mohanambal. What does the author refer to as Pancake? Name the actresses who must have used it. Pancake was the brand name of a makeup material. Truckloads of this material were used by Gemini Studios. Greta Garbo, Miss Gohar and Vijayanti Mala might have used it, but Rati Agnihotri might not have even heard of it. The Gemini Studios was a haunt of poets and it had its due effect on the employees of the studios. Justify. Gemini Studios was the favorite hangout place of poets like SDS Yogiyar, Sangu Subramaniam, Krishna Sastri and Harindra Nath Chattopadhyay. The employees wore a khadi dhoti with a clumsily tailored white khadi shirt. It was a crowd of dreamers and an assembly of Gandhiites and Khadiites. Then Congress rule meant prohibition and most employees worshipped Gandhiji, but beyond that, they had no admiration for the political thought of any kind. They disliked a communist and to them he was a godless man with no love. He could kill his parents or his children and he was always out to cause and spread unrest and violence among innocent and ignorant people. Such notions, which prevailed everywhere else in South India at that time also, naturally floated about vaguely among the khadi-clad poets of Gemini Studios. Write a brief character sketch of Kothamangalam Subbu. Kothamangalam Subbu was universally hated by all in the makeup department. He had a modest beginning as an office boy and had now reached to the position of number 2 at Gemini Studios. He was a Brahmin and hence had contacts with affluent people. He looked cheerful at all times. He could never do things on his own, but his loyalty endeared him to the boss. His creativity surfaced when commanded. He could come out with various alternatives for enacting a scene. He gave direction and definition to the Gemini Studios during its golden years. Subbu was also a poet and capable of complex and higher forms of poetry, but he purposely addressed it to the masses. His success in films overshadowed his literary achievements. He composed several story poems and also wrote a novel, Thilana Mohanambal. He was an amazing actor and performed better than the main players. He loved people and his house was a permanent residence for guests. Despite this, he had enemies. It could be so because he seemed so close to the boss or because he seemed like a sycophant. Why was the legal advisor referred to as the opposite? The lawyer was also officially known as legal advisor, but everybody referred to him as opposite because he did not give legal but illegal and destructive advice. He marred the career of an extremely talented actress. Once when that actress threw a tantrum on the sets, the lawyer switched on the recording equipment, and when she paused for breath, he replayed it. It was an outburst against the producer. When she heard her voice again, she was struck dumb. A girl from countryside, she never recovered from the terror that she felt that day. While every other member of the department wore a khadi dhoti with slightly oversized and clumsily tailored white khadi shirt, their legal advisor wore pants and a tie and sometimes a coat that looked like a coat of mail. As a consequence, often he looked alone and helpless. He was a man of logic in a crowd of dreamers, a dispassionate man in a group of Gandhiites and Khadiites. Then the boss closed down the story department, and this was perhaps the only instance in all human history when a lawyer lost his job because the poets were asked to go home. What was the reaction of Gemini Studios to Frank Buttman's moral rearmament army? What was the anticlimax? Frank Buttman's moral rearmament army of about 200 visited Madras in 1952 and they were given a warm welcome in the studios. The staff of Gemini Studios had a nice time hosting 200 people of all the hues and sizes of at least 20 nationalities. They presented two plays, Jotham Valley and The Forgotten Factor, in a very professional manner. The employees of the studios saw the plays many times. The message of the plays was plain, but the sets and costumes were excellent. Madras and Tamil dramas community was so impressed that for years almost all Tamil plays had a scene in the manner of Jotham Valley. Later they learned that MRA, that is Moral Rearmament Army, was a counter movement to international communism and big bosses of Madras like Mr. Vasan simply played into their hands. What does the writer say that political leanings of the people at Gemini Studio? Barring the office boy and a couple of clerks, everybody else at Gemini Studios radiated leisure and was a lover of poetry. Most of them wore khadi and worshipped Gandhiji, but beyond that, they had no political leanings at Gemini Studios. Since most of the employees were political and worshipped Gandhiji, they wore khadi. However, all of them disliked the term communism. To them, a communist was a godless man who had no love and could kill his own family. He was always out to cause and spread unrest and violence among innocent and ignorant people. How did the writer discover Spender's identity? When Gemini Studios prepared to welcome Spender, they did not have any clue about the identity of the visitor. All they knew was that he was a poet from England. However, he was not one of the poets from England that they had heard of. Later on, they heard that he was an editor, but again he wasn't the editor of any known British publication. When the gentleman arrived, the mystery of his identity deepened. He spoke, but none understood because of British accent. Much later, when the encounter, a relatively known periodical, announced a short story contest through the Hindu, the writer went to the British Council Library to find out more about periodical. When he read The editor's name, it sounded familiar. It was the poet who had visited the Gemini Studios. His name was Stephen Spender. Explain the reference, the god that failed. Years later, when the writer no longer worked for Gemini Studios, the writer had a lot of time but not much money. So on footpath in front of the Madras Mount Road post office, a pile of brand new books for 50 paise each caught his attention. He paid 50 paise and picked up a copy of the book The God That Failed. It had 6 essays by 6 eminent men about their disillusionment with communism. The writers were Andre Gide, Richard Wright, Ignazio Salon, Arthur Koestler, Louis Fisher, and Stephen Spender. The name Stephen Spender arrested his attention since he was the poet who had visited Gemini Studios. In a moment he realized the reason for his visit. The boss of Gemini Studios had not been interested in Spender's poetry, but communism. Here it refers to communism, the idea that had seemed so promising initially but had disillusioned many. The boss had known about and shared in Stephen Spender's disillusionment with communism. The God That Failed was a compilation of essays by 6 eminent men, including the author, as a sojourn into communism and their disillusioned return. What was the writer's job? How was it viewed by others in the studio? The duty of ASOKAMITRAN in studio was to cut out relevant newspaper clippings on a wide variety of subjects and store them in files. People who saw him at work felt that he was doing next to nothing. They saw him sitting at his desk tearing up newspapers whole day long. So anyone who felt he should be given some occupation would barge into his cubicle anytime and deliver an extended lecture. More often than not, it was the boy in the makeup department who pushed his way in to enlighten him on how his great literary talent was being allowed to go waste in a department fit only for barbers and perverts. Bring out the humor in the job done by the makeup men. The writer says that the gang, not group, of men from all the corners could transform any decent-looking into repulsive crimson-colored fiend because of the enormous amount of makeup they used on the actor. The chief makeup man made the chief actors and actresses ugly. According to the writer, they used truckloads of pancake. Other than pancake, they used local manufactured potion and lotions. He feels with so much makeup, they looked uglier than in real life. This was required to make them look acceptable in the movie. So this whole part is very humorous. I hope this video was helpful to you. All the best for your exams. Do let me know if you require anything else. Take care. Bye.